China expert Jerry Gray joins the show to discuss the G20, China's economy, and the state of our world today. Hey, everyone. My name is Jason Smith. I'm originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Today, we are joined by influencer Jerry Gray, who you can find on YouTube's channel, Jerry's Take on China 799. Over 2 decades, Jerry has lived, worked, married, studied, and now retired in China. He's traveled 30,000 kilometers on a bike around China, and there are only 3 mainland provinces he's never visited. We're going to ask him about those later. While he claims not to be an expert on China, he knows more about China than most people I know who call themselves an expert.
Thank you for the invitation back to your show. I don't consider myself an expert on China, and you've mentioned that I have cycled a lot in China, and I have seen a lot of places in China. And I'm particularly interested in how China is going to handle this G20. The next G20 is in Brazil, where China and Brazil have a very good relationship. And the most interesting thing for me is who's going to represent the United States. Donald Trump is self-important enough to invite himself. That could happen. But Biden is a kind of lame duck. He's a dead in the water duck, as it is. He's in that I think they call it the lame duck period now.
Yeah.
But the fact is, he's been in that period for the last 6 months or close to the last 6 months. So what influence he can bring if he does go there, and what degree of importance he is seen by the other 19 or 20 leaders. There's Pan-Africa now, and there's also Spain is added to the G20 as a permanent guest. But what he can achieve, in my opinion, is virtually zero. So who is going to lead America's charge at the G20? Because America basically runs the G20, but this year they won't be running it. It won't be Trump running it. He may turn up, but it won't be Biden running it either. And I think that provides a great opportunity, a great openness for China and even Russia, because both of those countries, they're kind of the non-aligned countries now. If we go back to the Bandung Conference of 1955, we've got an anniversary of that coming up very soon. I think it's April next year, so 70 years since Bandung, where the non-aligned groups, which included Russia and China, got together to kind of overcome the G20 type of, there wasn't a G20 back then, but the Western colonization, imperialization, that kind of thing. G20 is a changed format now. When it first started, it was quite successful. First 10 years, it was doing a lot of good things in terms of environment, in terms of financial economy. And then I think it was 2009, the G20 became elevated to a leaders meeting as opposed to a government conference or an intergovernment conference. And I think that's probably, since then, they've not achieved very much. They certainly achieved a bit in 2008 with the financial crisis, and that's what they were really there for. From that period of time, it's been more about communiques and arguing about who's going to say what and what's acceptable to sign and what's not acceptable to sign. So it seems to me that its formality is now nothing more than that. So it's not really a functioning group. But what it does have is sidelines. This is where leaders meet other leaders in the side rooms and they talk. We've had Biden and Xi meeting, we had Trump and Xi meeting, we had Trump and Putin meeting a few years ago and spending hours together, much to everyone's concern, because they got along quite well. And I think a lot of Trump's enemies, if that's the right word, adversaries, competitors, critics, whatever you want to call them, would view that particular time as quite a worrying time, where Trump and Putin got together and seemed to get along quite well. So yeah, it has its sidelines, but as a group, I think it's done its dash. It's over. BRICS is far more important. ASEAN, RCEP, all of the things that are going on that China and Russia's not involved in the RCEP or ASEAN, but all of those things that are going on outside of the old colonial imperial grouping, which the G7 and the G20 have kind of represented, are all changing factors now. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm very curious to see who America sends and what influence America can have over this. The meeting of the 20 largest leaders, the European Union and Pan-Africa are there now as well. So you've got some very, very significant players, but they don't seem to be playing any cohesive game. They're not all playing by the same rules either. It started off as it was in adherence to the UN Charter, which the United States is clearly not. It was in adherence to the World Trade Organization. Again, the United States are clearly not. And that's not criticism that I'm saying I live in China and the United States are evil. It's a very, very well documented fact that the United States don't recognize most of the charters of the United Nations, most of the conventions, and they certainly don't recognize the World Trade Organization as a legitimate, nor the International Criminal Court or many other things. They don't recognize them as legitimate, and they want to control them. So, I mean, I'm not just saying that because I'm in China. It's a fact of life. So the changing transition of the G20 has been interesting. It's ceased to become an important meeting in itself, but it's a very important venue for very important smaller meetings to take place.
I think your assessment is the same as mine. All the sidebars where world leaders get together, oftentimes they can resolve bilateral issues, while these large organizations, which are, again, consensus based, have to completely agree. And then once they agree, it's required that they go home to their home governments, which all operate differently, and then get buy-in at the legal level in their own nations, which is virtually impossible with as many members as the G20 has, because it has G20, G7, BRICS, African Union, and the European Union. You're not going to get all of those nations at a national level to reach consensus on anything, in my opinion.
No. Well, the other thing is that sometimes you'll get the leader of the country. Now, this won't happen in China, because when Xi Jinping goes there and he says something, then he comes back, that becomes policy or strategy or whatever it is. Chinese government follows what the leader says it does. But in the United States, in these two-party democracies that you have, the United States is the largest of them. Australia is the same. Their leader can say one thing. When he gets home, their parliament can say, no, we're not going to do that. So the whole thing just changes anyway. So it's really not something that I can see any huge benefits for. Back in the days of Obama and Xi Jinping getting together, that's 2012, I think it was, they entered the Paris Accord, and that was a great thing. But not much has happened there in terms of what the US have done. And China is not really involved in the Paris Accord or Paris Agreement anymore. It's just done, and you know this better than anybody else in the world, I think, it's just done incredibly good things in terms of its elimination. And it is an elimination now. It's in the process of eliminating emissions, carbon emissions. So it's done some amazing things, which you've documented over and over again. So we no need to go through them. But that's one of the benefits of this. But again, that didn't happen in the grouping. That happened as a side meeting. So that's the importance of those sidelines.
Absolutely. You know what's interesting? I've recently been paying attention to the way that China approaches have they reached peak carbon or not? Because if you look at like international bodies and international research and international magazines which document peak carbon issues and issues around carbon, they say, well, China has basically reached peak carbon, or maybe it's done it in 2023, or maybe it's done it now in 2024. And there's all this evidence and all this research, but China officially says it has not, and officially is very adamant that, in fact, they are not going to reach peak carbon until 2030, and that there will be a gradual emissions decrease starting in 2035. So even though international experts are like, good job, China, China's like, no, we're not saying good job yet. So I think it's really interesting that China is actually being really humble about what it may have accomplished. It's not eager to blow its trumpet and say, hey, we did a great job. Whereas that's exactly what leaders in my own country would do if they had international scientists saying that America had achieved something. They'd be like, yeah, we did it. But China's like, maybe not yet. Just hold off.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for taking that approach. China is a humble. It has humility as a nation, as a psyche, as a kind of a national characteristic. China is a relatively humble country with relatively humble people, but they usually do say, yeah, look what we've done, we've achieved this. They are okay with that. And I think the reason is probably because they also know they still are building coal-powered power stations. And they're doing that with different coal and different technologies, carbon capture and stuff like this. So they are doing it, and there's criticism around the world. So I think what China is doing is quite wise. It's holding off on the big announcement, even though it knows it's achieved this, because right now it's going to fluctuate. With this story, did they do it in November last year? Have they done it in March of this year? Have they really achieved it? They're saying, yeah, well, we're quite happy with our progress, and we're not claiming it's achieved yet. But when it is, we'll let you know. And when they are absolutely certain that it is always going to be under that target, then that achievement will be announced. And I think that's probably going to come early, right? They do try to make their announcements a little bit early. They have something to be proud of, for sure.
Absolutely. I was actually in the Taklamakan Desert, where you've been before, and I was at a solar farm where they had built a 250 megawatt farm. It was just remarkable walking around. It was actually quite dusty. I was like, oh, how do you clean these? And like, oh, we're not cleaning it yet because this one doesn't get activated until next year. So I was like, oh, okay. But it was really remarkable. We flew a drone around. It's just enormous. But this is just one of numerous ones like that. I want to switch up though. Speaking of you cycling, any recent exciting cycling adventures you could tell us about? Maybe a couple stories.
I've taken a little time off. I'm back on the bike now. I had a little health incident last month. I ended up in hospital for a few days.
That.
Yeah, it was a big surprise to me that I had thrombosis. I'm a relatively active guy, and thrombosis is connected to sitting sedentary lifestyle. But I do spend a lot of time in this chair, which is, I can see me swinging around on my comfortable chair, and it's probably too much time. So that period of time in hospital caused me to stay off the bike for about a month. But just this week, I'm back on. I'm doing 20 kilometers a day. Again, we'll build that up. We'll get up to about 50, 60 kilometers a day. And then my plan is to do somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 kilometers before Christmas. And so that's what we're doing now. And next year, second quarter of next year, we plan to cycle to Mongolia. That's the next big one. That's across Inner Mongolia. So people in China, when they say, oh, we're thinking about this, they say, oh, you're going to Mongol? No, we're going to Mongolia. We're outside Mongol, which is the other Mongolia. And we'd actually planned to go to Ulaanbaatar for a short cycle. That'll take about 2.5 months. And
a short cycle. The rest of when I think of a short cycle, I think of going out for an hour. That's my idea of a short
Most
cycle.
people do. I often do. When I used to do teacher training, and I had a lot of kids in there, I do IELTS training, and I'd always have a little session to talk about this, an informal session to break the ice and talk about what we like to do. And I would say, who likes to ride a bike? And then I'd say, well, how far do you go? And I once cycled to Zhuhai, which is 40 kilometers. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I once cycled to Urumqi. And they go, what? What? It really is a long way. And they go, no one cycles to Urumqi. Well, we did, myself and another guy in 2014. And then my wife and I flew to Xinjiang, and we cycled home. And it was really that 2019 trip which caused me to come online and be the China commentator that I am. I started just by posting a few photographs and stories on Twitter of a bike ride that I'd done from Harbin down to Zhongshan. It's basically all the way down the east coast of China. And I did that cycle with a friend just because I was working in Harbin and I just felt like having some time off when I finished the job. I was doing a training contract just for 2 or 3 weeks. And when I got to the end of the contract, and the lady who was organizing it, and she said to me, oh, what day do you want to fly home? Do you want a few days holiday? And do you want me to get you a ticket to Shenzhen or Guangzhou? How do you want to go? And I said, well, could you just give me the money? And she said, oh, yeah, we can do that. And I used the money that was supposed to fly me home to buy a bike, and I rode it home. It took 42 days, 3,600 kilometers. And I mean, I just call that my ride home from work. And it was just a bit of fun that I thought we'll give that a shot. And then the 2015, my wife went one better than me. She walked from Zhongshan to Beijing, carrying first of all a backpack, and then one of my friends, donated her a trailer. So she was walking along like a construction worker with a wheelbarrow behind her. It worked pretty well.
So that she dragged the trailer.
Yeah, it had a harness, and it was a very well designed trailer. It was a trailer. It was designed in Holland by a guy who makes these things for bikes and a few other things. So it was a trekking trailer. So it was specially designed, very big wheels, like the wheels of an old style pram. Remember when they used to be called perambulators? The big old wheels from their old style pram. Very, very nice, easy, well balanced thing. So she put the weight in, the heavy stuff went at the bottom, and basically, it was very easy, much easier than carrying a backpack.
Wow. So she was camping or staying in hotels?
Both. I mean, sometimes when you same as cycling, when you're cycling and you get to maybe Gansu, then you start to realize that it's just a long way to the next town. It's like 180 kilometers to the next town. And you don't want to cycle 100 kilometers plus in a day. 100 is enough. 80, 90 is a good day. And so if there's not a town to stop 80 or 90 kilometers away, you've got no choice, really. So occasionally we'll have to, I think on our trips, we probably camped on each of the trips probably 8 or 10 times. The rest of the time you're in hotels. But when you're walking, particularly if you're not in the kind of hubs like the Greater Bay Area, you'd never, ever be able to walk so far that you can't find a hotel. But actually, you probably can. If you get to Qingyuan in the north of the Greater Bay Area, you probably would have that situation. So if you're walking 25, sometimes 30 kilometers in a day, you have to camp. There's no choice. But then, of course, we mostly stay in local places, like we call them, they are called bingguan. And the bingguan is like a guest house, a private home that has hotel rooms and quite often a nice canteen or kitchen downstairs for good meals, home-cooked meals.
You know, the last time I spoke with you, I had not yet been to the Greater Bay Area.
Right. I know you were down here a while ago. Mm-hmm.
I was in the port of Nansha, which is part of the Guangzhou port, and I was on the top of I want to say it's a parking lot, but it wasn't. It's a storage place that looks like a parking lot. I was standing on top with some local gentleman, and I was like, "What is that over there? It looks like a city." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's Shenzhen." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's that over there?" And he says, "That's Guangzhou." And I was surprised because I'm standing like in Nansha, and I can literally just look over the water and see different cities, and they're really actually all kind of close together because in Beijing's trying to create the Jingjingji kind of a thing, but Tianjin's far. You can't see it from Beijing.
It's true. I mean, we can see Shenzhen from here, and they have just put a link in. It used to take about 2.5 hours to get there. I mean, for example, if I needed to go to Luowu to cross the border, I would catch a bus from here. It had to go up to Nansha and then turn right and go across the Human Bridge. And that would take at least 2.5 hours. Now I can be at that border in an hour. So it's not 90 minutes off the journey. There's a big claim inside of the Greater Bay Area, in particular in Guangdong, that it's only half an hour from Zhongshan to Shenzhen. And technically that's true, but the reality is from my house to the bridge is about 25 minutes. It's 20 or 30 minutes. The bridge is 30, 40 kilometers long. I'm not sure. I think maybe 28. And then there's a little tunnel, which is 7 or 8 kilometers as well. And once you get across there, that's the 30 minutes. So getting on the bridge to getting off the bridge is 30 minutes. Then
well, I'm sure.
But it's all freeways. You know, you get off the bridge and you can see Shenzhen, but you don't actually go into it unless you come off the freeway, pay the toll, and go into the city. So yeah,
well, if you cleared all the roads off and you had a Ferrari, you know, something like that, maybe you could do it from your door in 30 minutes.
Actually, just the interesting thing is the first time I went there, I thought it was going to take me an hour to get to the bridge because the bridge is about 30 kilometers away from my home. I live in downtown and it's way down in the south of the city, right on the border of Zhuhai, which is another special economic zone that you can see from Zhongshan. And I thought it was going to take ages to get there. And suddenly the guy went off in a different direction to what I expected. And 1 or 2 minutes later, we're on a freeway. I've never seen this freeway before. This is how fast. I mean, I cycle everywhere, and I'm riding along. I haven't cycled down this road for 3 months, and there's a new freeway above me. How did they do that? They just build these things so fast. And this area, I'd love to send a drone up now and have a look. I haven't really thought about doing this until just now. The area that I'm in is absolutely surrounded by high-class freeways, highways, motorways to the English. They really are. It's an incredibly well-infrastructured region. 87 million people live in the Greater Bay Area. I think there's 110 million in Guangdong province. But the Greater Bay Area also encompasses the SARs, Macau and Hong Kong. So they get the extra people there. And there's only 9 cities in the Greater Bay Area. We're right in the middle. Zhongshan is right in the middle and probably the cheapest city in the Greater Bay Area to live.
I like to use the word affordable, but you know what? You remind me of something in terms of like how fast China is still developing its infrastructure. There's a Buddhist temple to the west of Beijing. Technically, it's inside of the municipality of Beijing, but it used to take an emperor a couple of days to get there. But they've literally just bore holes and put highways through the mountain. And I can drive there from my home in Beijing to the temple in like 30 minutes. And so my wife and I, we got in her car and we're like inside of tunnels for like 10 minutes at a time. And then boom, Buddhist temple. And it's just remarkable how China is just still, outfitting its infrastructure constantly all the time. It's this China speed thing has not let up, which brings me to the next question.
Right.
Technically, if you just look at the statistic for the percentage of GDP increase, the GDP is decreased in terms of how, but it's actually adding the same amount of money this year as it did last year, as it did 5 years ago. It's just like $1 trillion a year that's being added. So from your perspective of having lived in China for 20 plus years, is China's economy slowing? Is that the right word? If so, how? If not, how would you characterize how China's economy is currently growing?
Okay, there's no evidence that it's slowing. I mean, there's evidence that it has been through some patches of slowness, yes. There's massive stimulus recently been announced, and I think one of them was a $1.4 trillion US dollars, which is, 1.4 trillion US dollars, 200 trillion RMB for local
10 trillion.
governments.
I think it's 10 trillion US dollars.
10 trillion.
Or 10 trillion RMB.
Sorry, you're right. 10 trillion, 1.4 trillion US, 10 trillion RMB. And this is effectively for hidden debt. So all of the problems, I mean, every economist says, oh, China's got too much debt in its local governments. Yeah, it did. And they knew that, and they've been working to change it. And they have now implemented a system where the local governments can do what's called a debt swap. And this is going to save something like 14 trillion RMB. It's going to save more than it's costing. And it will allow governments to restructure their debts and restructure their systems. And if there's one thing that China does very well, it's implement changes. They do it very well. They've done it so many times. Historically, it's not just the Communist Party or the CPC. It is historical that China has implemented changes when a new policy has been enacted. So they're doing that right now. They've stimulated the economy in a big way. About 10, maybe more years ago, they really restructured Social Security. So every person who's got a job has got unemployment insurance, got housing insurance, has got health insurance. They've got all of these things now. And everybody's got a living wage. If you go for a job, you get a living wage. There's none of this minimum salary. So that's the socialist side of China coming out. Then they've got the capitalist side, the Chinese characteristics. They don't like to call themselves capitalists. They say we're socialists with Chinese characteristics, but that you cannot say China's a pure socialist. You can't say it's pure capitalist. What they've done is they've looked at how do we need to benefit society as a socialist government, and one of those ways is a controlled free market economy. And that's a contradiction in terms. And any economist in the rest of the world will go, "You can't do that." Well, China's doing it. They're not saying we're capitalists. They're not saying we're socialists. They're saying we're socialists with different characteristics. And those characteristics are allowing people to get rich in a capitalist society. And they're controlling it to the point where they're saying you're allowed to get rich, but you're not getting obscenely rich. We're not going to have an Elon Musk We're not going to have a Jeff Bezos. You're not going to get powerful enough to tell the government what to do, but you can be as rich as you want. And when you get rich, your responsibility is to give some of that back to society. That's the way China works. So, yeah, we've been through some challenges. There was the big challenge, of course, was COVID, which really did hurt the economy. The recovery from COVID was slower than expected. The crash, I call it a controlled demolition of the property market. That's all over now. And people are saying, oh, they're still in the depths of a crisis. That we're not at all. You can go to any city and buy an affordable home. Now, there are still places like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, where the affordable homes are very expensive, but salaries kind of match that. You come here, you can still buy a home for 500,000 RMB. 500,000 RMB is what, I don't know, $80,000, something like that.
Well, let me ask you, let's just, it sounds like you have a lot more to say, but people are going to be wondering that $80,000 home, that 500,000 RMB home, what's that like? What does that include? How is that comparable to a home in Australia, America?
I'm in one now. I bought this in January this year, and it cost 500,000 RMB. And I mean, this is my studio, but the rest of the house looks kind of modern like this. It's an old building, we've renovated it. So the renovation cost us the 500,000. The buying and the renovation together cost 500,000. So 700,000 would be $100,000. So 500,000 is around about $80,000. This is a 3-bedroom home. It only has 1 bathroom, but it has a very, very modern kitchen. You can see where I am. This is my studio, so it's got a few things hanging up in it. But the rest of the house is very similar. It's we've got bookcases. We've got in fact, we've got a toilet that flushes itself and has a warm seat. So all the things that you want in a modern home, we've got them, and it cost us less than $80,000 US. Mm-hmm. And when I say that my first house in China cost me 240,000 RMB, that's $30,000, people would look at that and go, "What? What? You can't possibly." I left Australia, where you're looking at $1 million for an apartment, and I bought my first apartment here for 30,000.
Wow.
That's the way it was. Yeah. I still got it. If anyone's interested, we're putting it on the market now.
Well, goodness. Actually, my wife and I are thinking about buying a second home, because our first home we bought, it was really small and cute, and we're like, oh, this is our apartment. But now we have more, and we're like thinking, oh, maybe we should upgrade to something that's more like, bigger and proper. Can I switch gears?
Sure.
China's economy, you mentioned it's changing. It's adapting, it's moving forward. What is new quality productive forces? What is China doing? Where is China going? Why wasn't China happy with where it was, and where is it going?
Well, why it wasn't happy, I think China was happy with where it was, but it recognizes that you need plans for the future. So what's going to happen? So America back in the 1950s and the 1960s was extremely happy with where it was, but they've still got the same infrastructure. So probably now they're not so happy with that aspect of it. So they've still got the same train lines, the same school buildings. They've still got the same. I mean, the only thing that's gone radically improved is probably shopping. But that, in one respect, that's not an improvement. That's a decline in the standards of the local high streets. So you've got strip malls and Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, and those sorts of things. And you've got no butchers, no bakers, and no candlestick makers anymore. So there is that aspect of it. China is constantly changing. So it's going into technology now, EVs, solar panels, green energy. It's constantly changing its outlook. So it has a 5-year plan, and the current 5-year plan is part of a 35-year plan. So they're always thinking so far ahead. Now, you can't do that with election cycles. Now, this is one of the benefits of the stability. The stability is one of the benefits of the one-party system. Many people can argue, oh, that's not democratic, but because they change policies all the time, they are very democratic. So I would say that EVs are the big one. Green power is another big one. Lithium ion, which is connected to both of them for power storage. These are big things. And then to combine that, they've got massive investments in education. So we've got a whole raft of new, I think 10 million new graduates come out every year from Chinese universities. Now, I don't know how that compares with America or Europe, but it's pretty good. And our Chinese universities also are entering those top echelon universities. Tsinghua is in the top 10. There's one in Shanghai in the top 10 as well. I think there are 3 in the top 20 in China. But in terms of science and technology, I think it's Tsinghua School of Science has actually overtaken MIT. So it's number 1. So that's what China are doing for the future. Now, what does that mean? AI is going to be big, of course, but AI is being used here to benefit mankind. Whereas in some communities, AI is used to benefit the military-industrial complex and fight better wars and do that kind of thing. I'm not suggesting China doesn't do that. I'm saying that it does parallel. It works very hard for the community. And I think that's probably the future. The way it's going is going to be automation, robotics. There's going to be less work for people like us. But then again, there are going to be less people coming into those jobs. So this is one of the factors they're considering so far in front. Now, right now, there's a youth unemployment problem. It gets exaggerated grossly in the West when they say, oh, China's youth unemployment is 20%. No, it's not. It goes up to 20% every June, July, when 10 million graduates come out of university and they're looking for jobs. So yeah, it goes up. But then by September, it's come down to 10 or 12%. And by October, it's 9%. It's still too high. They understand that it's still too high. But let's not grossly exaggerate a spike in the system, because I don't think, and I haven't really researched this yet, so this is an off-the-cuff comment that may be corrected later, I don't think China's youth unemployment is any worse than Europe's or America's or anywhere else. But I would need to go and do some research to find that out for certain. But it's just grossly exaggerated rather than a reality. You know, when 10 million people graduate from school, they're all looking for a job, and the youth unemployment spikes. So that's the way I see China is developing. They're changing to a technology, AI-driven. Space is huge. Satellites are huge. Robotics and AI, and of course the power, the green power, green energy, environment. The one big factor, the huge factor. John Ross, the economist, who I think you've spoken to as well. John told me in an interview that the biggest factor that you can take away from any country's economy is what's happening to their life expectancy. If their life expectancy is going up, then everything is in order. If it's going down, then things are not. And that is what's happening in China. Life expectancy is improving. Unfortunately, in the United States, life expectancy is declining. Now, what does that tell you? And if John is right, and I think he is, something is very, very wrong in the United States economy that needs to be fixed. And until it does get fixed, all they're going to do is, at the moment, they point fingers and say, look how bad China is. It's authoritarian. And then they impose laws that stop you from doing what you want to do. So they're pointing fingers and saying, look, China's economy is collapsing. Its growth rate is double that of the United States. It's 10 times that of Australia. Is that a collapsing state? If that's collapsing, what's happening over there? What's happening in Australia? It's got 0.5, and it's got inflation, and it's got interest rates. China's reducing its interest rates. China's inflation is 0.3%. These are good things. These are not bad things.
You know what strikes me is strange is if I was a leader in the United States, I would want my citizens and fellow politicians and thinkers to know about China's success so that we could learn from it or be more competitive with it. And it seems really strange that China is doing really well, and leaders in the United States are trying to just say, everyone, don't look and see, because like it seems counterintuitive. Like, why would you hide the fact that China's economy is successful from your own population? To me, that seems like an almost unpatriotic thing to do for Americans to the American population, so that they don't they're not aware that they can have it better, that they could do better, that they could be more competitive, that things could be maybe restructured differently to make America more competitive, or these other
Mm.
countries. So to me, it always seems really bizarre when I point out how China's doing really well, and some people are like, "Oh, you hate America." What? No, not at all. It's the exact opposite. We should be aware of how amazing China is doing, so that we can learn from some of what it's doing and maybe adopt one or two of the policies that it's implementing. Like it's just so bizarre. I want to ask you from your personal experience. You get around obviously on your cycle, but also you live in China. Are people shopping as much as they did in 2019? Are people traveling? What's your experience like?
Traveling, yes. I've done a lot of traveling on trains. I'm off to Fujian in 2 days' time, and I can't go from Guangzhou because the trains are all full. I have to go from Shenzhen, so that's something interesting. The trains are full in Guangzhou, and I've got to go from Shenzhen. First stop Guangzhou, of course, but I have to get on the train a stop earlier just to get to Fuzhou, or Fujian, not Fuzhou City, Fujian province. So yeah, they're traveling. I had a holiday, my wife and I, in Sri Lanka, and the flight was full. So internationally, we're still traveling. The flight coming home from KL, because we had a stopover in KL on the way back, the flight was full, and it was Chinese people traveling home. So yeah, people are traveling internationally. The airport was busy as ever. In fact, the airport was as busy as I've ever seen it. And it's not a holiday time. It's just a normal. When it's holidays, those train stations are packed. I mean, you know the story there. Um, People are traveling, yes. Are people shopping? Not as much as they used to. But my wife is a classic example. I'm sure yours is too. My wife never goes shopping anymore. Very rare for us to go to the shopping center or the supermarket. She sits at home and orders it all. So what you do see as you're walking around the town are these little delivery riders all over the place, zipping around. So that tells me that shopping is not dying, it's changed. It's changing, but it has actually already changed. A lot more is done online and a lot less is done in the shops. Now, that's not to say the shops aren't making money, because my wife shops in Metro. I think Metro is German, I'm not sure, but we have a big Metro store here, but we never go there. I've been there twice. It's been open for 10 years, and I think I've been there twice. But it's got great products. So my wife sits here on the telephone, orders some great products, and 15 minutes later, they arrive. I was in a hotel in Guangzhou about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and I realized I'd forgotten. I took my computer with me, and I'd forgotten my mouse. Now, my computer does not work without a mouse. Oh my God, I mean, there's something wrong with the pad. So it's an old clunker, and I'm too poor to buy another one, that kind of thing. But it doesn't work without a mouse. So I can't use my computer. And my wife said, well, I'll order you one. And 15 minutes later, there was a ding dong on the doorbell. I opened the door, and there's a robot there. And the robot has got my mouse, my new mouse. So this happened in 15 minutes. From me realizing that I didn't have my computer and I couldn't do some of the work that I wanted to do, me getting an automatic, robotic delivery at the front door. So some kid on a bike had picked up my product in the local Xiaomi store, delivered it to the hotel. The hotel's put it into a robot. The robot's delivered it to my room. 15 minutes. That is what's happening with the shopping. So yes, we're living in a very different world, a parallel universe to the United States. Totally different to my hometown. As I say, I was in Sri Lanka. I had to carry a wallet and cash with me for the first time in years. And my wife wouldn't even carry money. She said, I'm not okay, you carry it. I don't want to carry money. So I was doing all the buying and everything. She's shopping and we're looking for nice new shirts or something. And she, can you give me some money for this? Said, use your own. You can't use our WeChat. It's really, really very interesting. Everything's done on cash outside of China. Everything's done automatically inside. They do have, in Sri Lanka, they do have touch and go and stuff like that with your cards. And they took a credit card where I needed to use it. But generally speaking, everything is cash.
Wow. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that because I come home after work, and on the way home, I usually have to pick up 2 or 3 boxes and bring them to my wife. I don't know, whatever they are. So yeah, again, I hadn't really thought of that. I'm going to the mall, I'm filming. I'm like, oh, is it as busy as it was? Maybe yes, maybe no. But like, yeah, every single day there is just a pile of boxes from my home and my neighbors' homes as well in front of our apartment complex, which is also an interesting plus for China because you can just have a place where there's just boxes sitting out in the open on a giant cabinet. No one's taking them except their own, which is
Honestly,
also
yeah.
says a lot about a healthy society when you don't have to worry about just leaving your stuff outside and no one's taking it.
That's right. That's true. Now, the way to test if your shopping center is actually surviving is take a look. Usually on the fourth or fifth floor, there's restaurants. Have a look in the restaurants, and if they've got chairs sitting outside and people waiting for tables, then you know that the society is pretty much okay. If there's no one in the restaurants, then society is probably less okay than it used to be. And we do that. That's about the only time we go shopping. Is we've got quite a large shopping center, just less than 5 minutes, 10 minutes walk, less than 10 minutes, more than 5 minutes, and we walk around the corner and we'll just go and have a nice meal there. And we do that a couple of times a week. So society is certainly not in any major trouble. I think it's going okay.
I wanted to ask you about Australia. So
Mhm.
specifically like Sino-Australian economic relations and trade. It seemed to me the last year or two, there was a lot more discussion about, allowing more Australian products into China and more Chinese products into Australia. How is that going?
I would say from the Australian perspective, it's going better than it is from the Chinese perspective. China's Premier Li Qiang went to Australia a few months ago and was warmly received and then brutally ignored effectively. What he did was he opened up Australia to the 15-day visa-free. He agreed that wine was back, coal was never off. Again, grossly exaggerated, misleading Western reports that there were 4 or 5 products that China has stopped because China didn't like something Scott Morrison said about COVID. It wasn't that case at all. I mean, there was a reality in that the relationship was deteriorating, but timber was not being imported into China because it had some kind of weevil in it. Don't ask me what, but some biosecurity threat. Lobsters had a biosecurity threat, and that was admitted in very recent discussions by their trade minister, Australia's trade minister, where he said lobsters will get back into China soon, but we have to resolve a biosecurity issue. What he didn't say is that we were exporting lobsters that were not certified lead-free. That doesn't mean lobsters had lead in them, but they weren't certified lead-free. And China said, we want certified lead-free lobsters. One thing China is very, very, very strict on is food products coming in. It takes years to get approval to bring any food products into China because it must be very, very safe, very clean. No veterinarian residual, no pollution residual, nothing. It's got to be very clean. So this is one of the amazing things people don't understand about China. A lot of people who've never been here think it's very dirty. They have really, really strict conditions on what foodstuffs can be imported and how we in China, and I'm not Chinese, but we live in China, and we are treated very, very well in terms of food security. So lobsters had no certificate of lead-free. The coal, and again, this was admitted in their parliament, the coal problem was that they were sending the dirty coal, the wrong coal. China was trying to buy a higher grade of coal, and coal that was cleaner was coming into China from Indonesia. China said, we're not accepting this coal anymore, and they turned back a few ships. And then, of course, it got beefed up into China's banned our coal, and then China had power failures the following year. Look what Australia said, look what China did. They stopped our coal, now they've got no power. China is 90%, actually more than 80%, not quite 90% coal self-sufficient. It imports from Indonesia, it imports from Russia, it imports from Mongolia, and it imports from Australia, and a couple of other places too, including the United States, Virginia. So it imports, and Virginia picked up its coal. Virginia actually increased its coal exports to China by 900% when Australia stopped shipping. Thank you, friends. Wow. Friends of Australia are not in America. And so this is something that Australia never got to hear. And then when the coal was coming back, it was the right coal, and they started accepting it again. And at the stage where Murdoch Press was saying China has banned Australian coal, China was Australia's second largest destination for coal. Japan was higher at that time. Because China only takes 2% of its imported needs from Australia. Listen to that carefully. 2% of its imported. It is 80% or nearly 90% self-sufficient in coal. It imports 18% of what it needs, or 19% of what it needs, something like that. And it was bringing in 2% of what it needed from Australia. So it made no impact whatsoever on China to say, we're not taking your coal. However, it's a huge impost on Australia. And what happened then was they got upset. The wines was another thing. They were dumping crap wines into China at high prices, and they were dumping good wines at low prices. And that's actually a World Trade Organization default. They were in breach of World Trade Organization rules. You cannot sell a product cheaper by export, because that's called dumping, than you sell it in your home country. So they were selling wines, good quality wines, at a cheaper price in order to dump them into China, and they were selling cheap wines at a high price. So there was some problems there. Now, would they have all happened at the same time if ScoMo hadn't said these things? I don't know the answer to that, but they were all bubbling away, and there was a genuine reason for all of them. Now, China is very good at the tit for tat retaliations, and it doesn't go first. It never has. It never interferes with other countries. It never goes first on sanctions or tariffs or restrictions. What it does is it accepts what other countries do and then says, okay, what are we going to do to hit back at that? And that's what that was. The situation now, coal is back in China, lobsters are back in China, wine is back in China, timber I don't think is, but just about everything that was a problem, barley, wheat, all of those things are still coming to China now. China has given Australia 15 days, and Australia are still investigating every single investment opportunity through their Foreign Investment Review Board and rejecting Chinese investments. So it's a one-way street at the moment, and I don't think China is going to keep playing this game in a nice way. I'm kind of hoping there's backroom stuff going on, but I'm a bit disappointed in. It's not a new government anymore. The Albanese government, the Labour government that's in power now, has been there for 2.5 years, and they still haven't really opened a good relationship, which Australia really should have. Australia is part of RCEP. It has the China-Australia Free Trade, CHAFTA, Free Trade Agreement. It's part of ASEAN. It is China's China is its largest trading partner in both exports and imports. It's the only developed country in the world that has a trade surplus with China. And so, because it's got a small population, but it's got massive supplies of iron ore, coal, and a few other things that China likes to buy. So it really needs China much more than it needs America. And then we got AUKUS, but that's for another video. AUKUS is a complete other story, and it really flies in the face of the relationship that they should have with their much nearer and probably much more important neighbor, China.
I wanted to ask about, because we have a change in leadership in my country, in the United States, and it seems like we're probably going to have an escalation of the trade war. That's just my guess. I could be wrong. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think about the effect of the trade war on the West? Is it benefiting from these tariffs and targeted sanctions?
Clearly not. The German government has just collapsed. It's not being very, very widely reported in Western media, but the German government has collapsed. The coalition that was held together very tenuously has given up. There's going to be an election in Germany. Scholz is over and done, and this will all happen quite quickly. So that's why did the German government collapse? People are saying because Trump got elected. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, there's a lot of dots to connect, but effectively Germany is in dire straits. It's in dire straits economically, manufacturing, it's in dire straits politically, and it's in dire straits with its social order, social disorder as well. It's got massive problems related to huge amounts of immigrants being there. And so it's got an extremism on both sides. So there's a lot of issues in Germany. France is not much better. And these are countries that have sanctioned Russia. There are also, in the European Union, countries that are trying and imposing sanctions onto China. It's quite clear that if you say we're going to put a 47% tariff on, or 67% or 18%, whatever the tariff is. Who's going to pay for that? The people. Now, if your people have got ever expanding incomes and they have a good standard of living, then you can afford to do that. But if you are struggling as an economy, which they are, because I saw von der Leyen the other day saying we need to buy cheaper and cleaner US gas. I don't see how this is possible. US gas is coming across on a ship. It might be cleaner. I don't know the answer to that. That's a technical issue. Chemistry is not my topic. But how can it be cheaper than turning back that pipe and bringing gas straight in? The pipe is there. As Putin has said quite clearly, we didn't turn it off. You did. And you can just turn it back on again. And they can, but they're not. They're buying it from America. So why? So European Union is now struggling and struggling badly. Anytime you put a tariff onto a product, it's clear that there's a couple of things that are going to happen. One is the product's going to become more expensive, or two, you're going to buy the cheaper product from your own country. Now, in a capitalist country with a free market and an open market, if I'm selling a solar panel for $100 and the Chinese one is $80, most people are going to buy the Chinese one. So let's slap 100% tariff on that and call that $160. Now, my $100 solar panel is the cheapest on the market. That's great, except that I can now put my price up to $140 because it's still cheaper than the tariffed one. That's what capitalism does. So just a very simple example like that. You're going to bring a car in, it costs $30,000. Okay, that's $30,000 car, that's great, but we're going to charge you $60,000 for it. Ford have got a $45,000 car, which is a similar product, and they're going to say, well, we're not going to sell it for $45,000. If there's a 60, we're going to sell it for $59,999. And so that's how it's going to go. So it's not going to help the people, and it will help the GDP. That's an amazing thing. That our GDP is great, but it's all fake GDP. So that's the problem. You can't build a GDP by ripping people off.
That's a really good point. We don't have time for all of the questions I was hoping to cover, so I'm going to ask you. I know it's quite all right. You have wonderful stories, which is why I want to have you on the show. But given this is the question I want to ask. Given your extensive time living in China, could you tell us about when you first arrived versus now, the transformation that you have seen and what it was like living through China's transformation thus far?
How long have we got? This is a good question.
Only a few minutes, actually.
Yeah. I would say transformation is the right word. When I arrived in China 2004, it was dirty. It was very cheap, very cheap. It's not as cheap now as it used to be, but it's still cheaper than Australia and Sri Lanka. So it's very, very cheap to live here. It was very dirty. It was corrupt. It had a lot of crime. Everybody had bars on their windows because people were breaking into their houses. There was street crime. Well, now we've got a situation where the air is clean. And I know that you've posted about this, but Zhongshan is right in the middle of the largest manufacturing region in the world, the Greater Bay Area. We're right in the middle of it. And we have lower pollution rates than most Australian cities. All Australian cities, actually. How does that happen? Now, I can remember being involved I was in a business and having to pay someone in government 10,000 RMB for an issue that he said, you're going to get fined for this. The fine will be quite high, but we'll take a 10,000 RMB deposit from you, and then we'll let you know what the fine is. I paid the 10,000 cash, no receipt. The fine disappeared. So that was it. That was how things were done back in those days. I can guarantee you that's not happening now. We even 12 or 13 years, Xi Jinping changed it, but Hu Jintao was trying, and Xi Jinping came in and said, first of all of these dinners, these grossly lavish dinners that government officials were putting on and all getting drunk, that stops right now. That stops, and it did. It stopped immediately. And then they started the waste program, and everybody said in the West, "Oh, China's just about to, China's starving. They're putting rations on food and dishes." No, it was just a simple case of we're wasting so much food. Let's not do that. So let's turn this around. So there was the excesses, and then the waste. They were kind of cut out. Then suddenly electric cars started to arrive. And I remember going to Shenzhen and getting an electric car and thinking, wow, this is amazing. This is only in the last maybe 11 or 12 years ago. Now you've got robotic cars. You can go to Shenzhen and get in a car with no driver. What happened here? So the transition in terms of the political corruption, the environmental degradation, the rivers were disgusting. You couldn't walk near a river. Oh, that stench was terrible. Now there are people fishing. I don't know if I'd want to eat the fish yet, but there are people fishing in the river now. And I mean, the river is only 150 meters from my home. There will be people fishing if I walk down there. Do they eat the fish? I don't know. Maybe it's just a hobby. But there's fish. That tells you something about the river. Do they eat them? I don't know. But the rivers are clean. The air is clean. The pollution is gone. There is literally no street crime at all. There is no road rage. There is no street crime. There's nothing. The murder rate is so low, it doesn't register on the scale in China. Yeah, they do get murders, but like per 100,000, it doesn't register as zero because it's too low. So when you're talking about murder rates in some American cities, they're up at 65 per 100,000. Here, they're not. You're at 65. No, I think you're 130 times more likely to be murdered on the way to a bar in Chicago than you are on the way to a bar in Beijing. It just doesn't happen here. I mean, we don't see it. We don't have any experience of it. And that's all happened. I mean, the murder rate has come down, the suicide rate is down, life expectancy is up, health outcomes. There is nothing that isn't better than it was in 2004. And in 2004, my wife tells me there is nothing then that wasn't better than it was when she was born in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. So this is what you've got. This is constant improvement. And my wife, walking around Sri Lanka, says it reminds me of China in the 1980s. That's how underdeveloped Sri Lanka was. We were in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, a few years ago, and she said it's just like China when I was growing up. So China has completely changed in every measurable metric, every visible metric, every social metric. China has improved, and it hasn't stopped. It's still going. So we're still in a transformation. I hope that answers.
Yeah, we're moving towards new quality development, which is going to maybe set a new concept of what modernity looks like. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time, Jerry Gray. Where can we find you online? Where would you like us to find you online?
Jerry's Take on China on both Twitter or X and YouTube. I do have a TikTok account, but I'm not very active. I'm really a YouTuber and a Twitterer. That's what I do.
Thank you again for your time.
No problem. Thank you very much indeed.